Okay, here's one that I'm tentatively thinking of entitling Rethinking the Paleo Diet. We've had so much thought and talk about that in recent days, and this article refers to that in a situation. What we're doing here is looking at a picture which is showing something during the last ice age, and at first thought you might think that we're looking at something that's 10,000 years old or so, but no, I believe that that girl there that's right here is modeled after the Neanderthal girl that has been in a few of my different videos. So that gives me one thought of it. Also, just looking at their habitation and the way they're going on, this isn't Cro-Magnon man, this is looking like Neanderthals or whatever. But if we look around, we can see that there's different animals, and this one is one that probably a lot of people can grasp a hold of because we're talking about food. So some of my videos specialize in some way, but I'm pretty sure that most of the people listening enjoy and indulge in food. Right here in the center of the picture, you can see these guys are looking on at different animals that are here. There are mammoths still extant right here, saber-toothed tiger like lions. And so some people might think, oh, well, they're in North America, but Neanderthals, and what's this deal? And well, there were lions actually in the old world too, all across Europe in ancient days. That's what all the Sumerian showings of them fighting lions and so on had to do with. There's a buffalo herd that's over here. They themselves seem to have a goat or an antelope here caught. And while they're looking on, they're looking in the distance at some horses, and makes you wonder, we know that they use them for food, but then it always makes you wonder, how did they eventually start domesticating them? And the first idea that came to my mind whenever I was a kid, knowing about little colts, and I had seen one and really wanted one, and thinking that what they had done is taken out the parents and then not killed the juvenile yet, and for some reason, or perhaps the kids and daughter got all enamored with it, and the thing grew up, and because they had to feed it to keep it going until they were going to kill it, they became attached somehow, and maybe it started from that little simple point right there that you might find. Regardless of that, and first horses and ideas that may stem from that, or visions of ideas of how that came about, we find that people were eating a very different diet, quite different than we were taught. I'm about 50 years old, and in school we were taught something totally different, that even by the time that I was in college, we were taught something slightly different in pieces. And then after that point, we have found so much more, and somehow in the last 15 to 20 years, we seem to have leaped and bounded again over that point. Sadly, in some ways, we seem to still be echoing what our grandparents used to say, as opposed to what we've learned now. But if you never learn it, never experience it, then you never know. That's why a lot of my articles are just trying to add to the basic overall knowledge, as well as other ones show you the truth and the way things came about in ancient days. So how old is bread making? Well, we've showed a recent video where 14,000 years ago they were making a bread, and actually more like a onion bread, mixing in certain things with it that they noticed also. But here's one showing, well, I've showed 2 or 3 others from older datings, but this shows Stone Age people were eating porridge 32,000 years ago. What we leave out in this point is actually wheat, and the emmer wheats and barleys that we're looking at. But these people were eating porridge. If you know anything about porridge and things like that, we're talking about oats and oatmeal type of foods. Archaeologists say they have found traces of wild oats on grinding tools from about 32,000 years ago. About 20,000 years ago, before formal farming is thought to have been established. That timeline keeps changing. The prehistoric people may have baked or boiled the oats and made flatbread, according to the researchers. This research, which has been underway for a number of years, seems to conflict with the belief that Stone Age people were largely carnivorous. Yeah, they were only meat eaters, and then, I remember at one point they said that we went from hunting and gathering to getting so good at hunting that we then became primary meat eaters, and that's what made the big change in there, and so on. But researchers have assumed that the primary foods of Paleolithic Stone Age peoples relied on meats and fats. They say botanical traces on food preparation tools and stone vessels are rare at Stone Age archaeological sites. However, in the past several years of analysis of stone tools have revealed the presence of trace of wild grains and seeds and roots of cattails and ferns. A recent fad diet, the Paleo diet, may need to be reconsidered in light of this new research. The researchers in this latest study, led by Marta Mariotti Lippi of Italy's University of Florence, say that the finding is the earliest known preparation of oats for human consumption so far. And she and her team examined a stone grinding tool from Grotta Pugliese. Now, this is the Pugliese cave that we've talked about many times, in southern Italy, and found traces of oats and evidence of grinding using grinding tools from 32,000 years ago. So we could say over 30,000 years ago, people were preparing a flatbread type, but at this point they're making it out of oats. Does that radically make it different? No, my wife buys all kinds of weird oat breads all the time, but let's dive another layer deeper. News follows research Mariotti Lippi participated in several years ago that found traces of wild starch on grinding tools in Italy, Russia, and the Czech Republic from at least 30,000 years ago, and I've shown the other two in other videos about a year and a half ago. You can look them up. That finding was announced in a 2010 paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. What we're looking at here is a grinding stone from the Grotto Pugliese in Italy that has residue of oats on it from 32,000 years ago. Now this is a grinding stone, but then there's another stone that goes along with this, and just like a grinding stone that you know of in Egypt and all the places and Samaria and all this guy's used, very much similar to that, can easily be recognized. So they swab test off of the surface here, and they realized that they were making oatmeal, a bread. We've had evidence of the processing of roots and cattails, but here we've got a grain, and a grain that we're real familiar with. Matt Pope, an archaeologist on the team, told New Scientist, if we were to look more systematically for ground stone technology, we would find this is a more widespread phenomenon. In other words, people are all dismissing it, and if they've ever found a flat stone anywhere in any thing, they go, oh, there's a flat stone too. Maybe somebody sat on it. Nobody ever does tests and things like that. But somebody looked at one, and other people said, that's a grinding stone. Well, that's way too early for it. Doesn't cost too much to make a test and then be sure of it. Swab, test, whoops. Swab, retest, oh wow. The study Pope refers to says, however, that the evidence of wild grain consumption also goes back to the Upper Paleolithic at a site in the Levant, so even much earlier. The researchers in that 2010 article say they found evidence of processing of grains and seeds in the Sea of Galilee area side of a hollow. It was also in this part of the world known as the Fertile Crescent that agriculture is believed to have been practiced starting around 12,000 years ago. It is remarkable how many thousands of years has been added onto that all of a sudden. And it butts up against the Younger Dryas event, but also Göbekli Tepe, because they know it was happening there, and it's the earliest they can give credit for. But 12 and 32 are 20,000 years apart, and yet they're already still making bread. Every time I hear about this, I get in my mind this ancient Sumerian song that's in the Epic of Gilgamesh and how it used to be sung. I have a video about this. There's this guy that's out named Peter Pringle who does this song, and you can look it up. He only does the first tablet, or the beginning origins. But how that tale begins is he tells you when this happened. It was long, long ago, before bread had ever been made or broken, before an oven had been fired. And it made me wonder, long time ago, wow, how long ago are they speaking of when they say this? Because there's evidence that this is not just the Sumerians here, already at that point, even though they wanted to say Sumerians invented agriculture, da-da-da-da-da. No, they perfected it. This is something that had been going on for tens of thousands of years. We're finding the truth of this is going back and stretching so much farther, and what used to be told for 3500 BC has now become 35,000 BC. Is it at the same level that these people were? No, and you can't find evidence of that. There's been far too much water under the bridge to find where somebody picked a piece of flat ground out and they threw grain on it. And even though they may have followed some animals around back and forth in migration, when they came back home, there it was all growing already. And they had already developed another type that would grow late in the year, and whenever they were over there, they picked it, along with killing the animals and surviving, and threw that in the ground, and then came back, and this is ready, and then they came back, and that is ready, and they kept doing that over and over again. At one point, they quit following the herds and were still able to subsist. And this is the point that we're talking about, and well, it seemed to be going on by a few people. But when we look at it, just like that archaeologist said, you're going to find that this is a much more wider phenomenon. European Paleolithic populations are generally considered to have been predominantly carnivorous because of the evidence for plant subsistence is limited, but current evidence for the Paleolithic human diet is obtained from the bone chemistry, dental microwear, and zoological and archaeological remains. You see, they find a bunch of bones around onto it, and of course there are no real remains for the plant matter that's there anymore. Funny, when they find a coprolite, that's actually a turd, and they look through it, there always seems to be a lot of stuff that's not evident here because all they have is bones, and because in ancient times when they looked at it and they didn't find grapes and apples sitting around anymore, of course, they did that. Well, you could find the pits of apples, the pits of this, the pits of certain things. Well, maybe they did something with the pits. You know, those will grow a whole new tree, a whole new plant. If they paid attention to collecting them, then you would probably find them much more rare than they would be in existence. Imagine how many seeds for plants would be found in our current trash today. Other than perhaps having something that would be like a, wow, did it just lose it? Other than something, oh yeah, it turned off and turned back on. Well, I have to boot in. So while it's doing this, not waste the whole video, imagine in your trash how much seeds and things like that you might find. Of course, you weren't going to have a bunch of paper and things like that, plastics and so on, that are not going to be evident back then. And if they were, they've pretty much all eroded from then. Well, paper would have been gone, but anything like that would have been gone. But then we have the idea that how much seeds are in your trash, how much seeds would be found in their trash, and if they're living in this cave, which looks like it happened quite sparsely, it doesn't look like this was happening constantly. Now it's having trouble booting up. Wonder if it was overheating or something. Anyhow, if we were eating a bunch of tomatoes and things that had ready seeds on them, you might find that sometimes associated right around the place where we lived. But if anybody was taking the trash out, it'd be away. But then what are all those bones just sitting there for? Are they saving them up just in case they need to keep the marrow and things like that? Because the smell of that can attract other animals. But then again, I guess they can kick those animals' asses and, hey, there's another dinner. It could almost be a lure situation in some ways. Well, it's going to take a minute to get back to this. Maybe I will edit part of this out. Because this has got to load, and then that's got to load, and then I've got to get over all the way to the article and then set it back up and line it up. So it's going to be a minute here, but just in a bland overview before we get to this, so I can say something to waste the time. Paleo diet would have had a whole lot more grains in it if anybody could find anything. And while the women were out hunting and gathering, and it makes you wonder, what did they hunt and gather? And sure, there were berries and nuts that they found, and that was fantastic. And they always picked the ripest ones, and that's the reason women shop the way they do now. And there's been so many videos about that and so on. But in reality, if they found any of these type grains, it seems like they were already well versed with the idea that you could take these and crunch them all up and do this other thing with it. It involved cooking and so on. So there's a little more to that issue than just eating something that you might wash off and eat, like berries and so on like that. But at the same time, how far over is this one? Just to show you all the stuff I've got pulled up here, guys. Oh yeah, it's on down here. It was coming up right in here and saying, boom. Yeah, there's about 10 or 12 more left off the end of that. I've got to work some of these out or it's going to crash and I'm going to lose a lot of that too. So bear with me. I'm going to try to put out a bunch of articles, but I try to release them one per day. I found whenever I started releasing more than one, I just seemed to lose people, and then it put them on this list where they don't even get answered by it. So predominantly carnivorous is what they were saying. For a variety of reasons, the last form of evidence is rare at Paleolithic sites, and Paleolithic populations are primarily considered as hunters. Previous studies at Dalney, Valnese, Kilsura, Kibara, and Ohalo identified plant remains, possibly representing an important element of the diet. And the last mentioned site also documents routine processing wild cereals and effective methods for cooking ground seeds. And a number of Upper Paleolithic sites also yielding grindstones, some of which have served for grinding plant tissue, whereas others were used for grinding red ochre. We've done a lot of videos about red ochre and its symbology carried through Caucasians all the way through, and how the art symbology of like the Egyptians, Minoans, Greeks, and so on showed that. And many of the early burials and where the body is just covered in it, swathed in it, if you will. Here we report on starch grains recovered on grinding stones from 3 Middle Upper Paleolithic or Gravettan and Gorodovician sites across Europe. So now we're looking at elder sites. This is not something at the last ice age. They say their analysis of starches and wear on tools from the site shows that pounding and grinding of wild plants was done relatively early in the Upper Paleolithic. Eric Trinkhouse of Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, United States, calls the findings another example of how advanced the people of Europe's Gravettan culture were. They produced technology, art, and elaborate burials. Some of those burials are associated with red ochre, but also their art, which we can see here. This is an Altamira cave. These people were described 15 years ago as hunter of the golden age, and the details of that are still being filled out. Trunkos told New Science. It's perhaps that they were well-rounded people, and maybe that Paleolithic diet needs to be rethought. Mariotti Lippi and her team hope to analyze more stone tools for evidence of traces of grain, of root grinding. Trinkhaus said that the evidence may even predate 32,000 years. In 2010, Lauren Cordain published the book Paleo Diet that advised readers to eat like a prehistoric cave dweller, to lose pounds and stay healthy. He advised eating lean meat, fish, nuts, seeds, eggs, vegetables, and cutting out wheat, dairy, and sugar, and potatoes and processed foods. Some researchers equate the rise of agriculture and the introduction of grains into the diet with corresponding higher rates of disease in the human fossil record. Sometimes people look at that and they say maybe we're just able to recognize it on not as elder bones too, but this study also shows that even many thousands of years before, people were deviating from this paleo diet to eat grains and roots. So it doesn't correspond anymore. It kind of ruins that idea that people have had, that once we started eating all these different fruits and things, we had different diseases and so on. But also, one can imagine in the variety of things that people would try back in the ancient days, that there might have been something that you would find that kids would be allergic to, or just this one would be allergic to, right? But in another view, you could find something that people wouldn't really notice an adverse reaction to until they ate it for a long term. And then they'd have to recognize that, it doesn't seem like it's that Coca-Cola that I keep drinking because I've drank it for years, but now I'm at this situation. And what they'd have to do, I guess, is run into people that were not having that and seeming to be more healthy and not having the same issues due to correspondence or something, and realizing that it's this that's causing the problem. Zookeepers deal with this all the time, where somebody might be trying to eat a weird plant or so on. You remember it from Jurassic Park, whenever they said, oh, it's all because they're eating this one thing and it's causing ulcers and all kinds of things on them over time from eating it. But this kind of resets the idea of what a paleo diet might be like, although I totally agree on the idea that the carbohydrates in a modern day where we're not running constantly and moving as much, if you want to lose weight, you have to cut out carbs. Works fantastically. But if you want to mimic a paleo diet, they were already doing it back then. If they had the opportunities, it seemed like it was well accepted by that point. Doesn't even seem to be a rare thing at all, especially when they find perhaps carried around grinding stones that were used for such, that even whenever they moved from place to place, somebody carried that. Let me know what you think downstairs. Peace.